Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Stephen Pineacker, and we have a very special guest on the program today. And of course, many of you recognize Jason Olson, the co-author of the book, The Burning Book, a Jewish Mormon memoir. I know I've been getting a lot of positive feedback from people who've been buying the book, and people are still watching our interview that we did last month about it. And Jason Olson, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Steve. It's so great to be with you.
So Jason has really been very helpful to me, kind of giving me a good picture of what's happening in the Middle East. Jason is actually you're actually one of the top authorities on Zionism. You've written books about it, and so you're an expert in the field of Zionism. You were raised Jewish, but then you converted to become a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And you have been helping facilitate some conversations I've been having. Well, you came on and we did with Dr. Nehemiah Gordon the day after the invasion, the invasion of Hamas into sovereign Israeli territory. You were on within 24 hours with me and Nehemiah, and of course, I've been talking to my connections in the Orthodox community and talking to a lot of different people, and also, just so you know, folks, I have been talking to Mohammed, who lives in Gaza, who is a Muslim historian and writer. And I talked with him on the phone. He got out of his bomb shelter to talk with me and give me updates. So I just want to let you know that I am in touch with somebody in Gaza who's telling me what's going on there. Now, he believes that Israel and the Jewish people and the Muslims should live peacefully and with peaceful coexistence. So I tell people, so there's good people, whether you're Muslim, you're Christian, you're atheist, or any other number of things. If you're in favor of peace in the Middle East, you're a good person. And I want to talk to all the good people, because we know that in all those camps, there's also bad people. So
Yeah.
I will be giving updates on my channel from Mohammed, who will just be sending me text messages detailing information. So I just want to let that know. But hey, this is a long intro, but I'm really excited because this Jason was able to introduce me recently, and we just talked yesterday on Zoom to my new friend, Luke. Luke Moon, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's good to be here. It's
So
a
now,
very interesting program that I've just learned about yesterday.
and it is important because what this channel has become. And by the way, folks, I will be announcing soon the formation of my newest YouTube channel, the Utah Interfaith Forum channel, which is birthed out of the Facebook group. And what this really is all about is about interfaith. So you hear of an evangelical Christian who has a Mormon podcast talking to a person who was raised Jewish, who converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, to my new friend Luke, who is a evangelical Christian who heads up an organization that is there to help the Jewish people. But I really love your organization. But before we talk about that, Luke, I just want you to kind of introduce yourself to the audience, give a little of your background, because it was interesting. You were raised Plymouth Brethren, which actually is highly influential in 19th century evangelical and even Mormon theology, dispensationalism, end of days. This was a really important movement that was actually formed right around the same time that Joseph Smith came into the scene as well. Maybe give us a little background as a Plymouth Brethren, and then what caused you to start getting involved in helping the Jewish people.
Yeah, so I did grow up Plymouth Brethren. My dad and mom my dad more specifically got saved in college by Plymouth Brethren people and started attending the church, and I really didn't know the degree to which its influence on the general church until much later in life, actually, because I actually it's a denomination very committed to sending out missionaries. It actually doesn't have it's an interesting structure. They don't have a formal pastor. They have teaching elders that teach each week, which I think is very similar to the structure of the Mormons. I'm just learning about the Mormons actually firsthand. For this year, first time in my life I've spent more than like an hour with Mormons, so it's been very insightful. But they're very interested in missions, and so my church sent me down when I was just graduated from high school to build a house for a missionary family. And then, I ended up coming back to the States, but not going back home. So I wasn't involved. And then by the time I did get back to Seattle, which is where I was born and raised, by the time I got back there, it was my parents had moved on to they were part of a Baptist General Conference church, which was Baptist. But in the meantime, I had really actually found my own faith. I was, being 18, 19, I was more interested in girls than church. But there's reached a certain point where faith actually became very important to me, and I couldn't get enough. And that happened to be in a Calvary Chapel denomination. Ended up going from there and be involved in a Presbyterian PCA church. In the midst of that, at some point, I was like a youth group leader at a Methodist church. I mean, and then I got charismatic for a while, and I would still say I'm charismatic, but I was in a proper hardcore charismatic church. I'm ordained Southern Baptist. That's interesting. I mean, I was a missionary for 12 years with an organization called YWAM, Youth with a Mission, and I was doing a lot of work in Asia. And at the time, I was in my early 20s. I didn't have any gray hair. And so, two things that will help you get a lot of influence in Asia is gray hair or Rev in front of your name. So I talked to the pastor of the church I was going to and said, it really help if I was able to put Rev in front of my name. And so I got ordained in the Southern Baptist, so I could put Rev in front of my name so I could be more effective in my mission work in Asia. So that was the story. Yeah, I moved to New York. Really, actually, what it was I started being interested in human trafficking, fighting human trafficking. It was a lot of awareness, but what happens when everybody knows? What then? And so I wanted to get involved in public policy because that's what when everybody knows, you got to do something about it. And so I wanted to know what to do something about it was part of. And so I moved to DC, got involved in the intersection of faith and politics, where I met my first Jews I'd ever met that I was aware of. Started having great conversations with Jews. Ended up going to Israel first time in 2012, and man, it got under my skin. I remember the story comes to mind was I was up on the Mount of Olives. It was raining. It was cold. It was March of 2012, and I went to I was like, this is terrible. I'm going to go somewhere warmer. So I actually went down to the Dead Sea. But later that night, I called my wife and I said, yeah, today I went up to the Mount of Olives and I went to the church where Jesus supposedly ascended into heaven. And my wife says, what do you mean supposedly? And I was like, yeah, what do I mean supposedly? No, I went to the place where Jesus ascended into heaven. I don't know if it was that church but I was in the place. I was on the Mount of Olives, and Jesus ascended into heaven from the Mount of Olives. And I was like, all right, well, and it just did something to me. It got under my skin. Started writing about my experiences, the stuff that I was seeing, the stuff that I was learning about. That got a lot of media attention. Got more opportunities to go. And in 2014, I met a guy. We were both attending the same conference in Israel. Robert Nicholson is his name, and he was starting this new thing called the Philos Project, and asked if I'd come on board with him. And I didn't want to move to New York. He said, there are trees here. Believe me, I don't believe you. But then I drove up, noticed there were trees around here, so I agreed to come. And that started the journey. And I went from a generalist in a sense to a specialist. So I spent a lot of time talking about, it's not just Israel, but it's the whole region. I mean, to your first point, Stephen, it was Philos means friend in Greek, and there are friends all over the region. There are Jews, there are Druze, there are Arabs, there are Arameans, there's all types of people, Bedouins, and like just all types of people. Some of them want to be like in friendship and live in friendship with other people, and some do not. And I think it's wholly appropriate to say, no, like these are the good guys and these are the bad guys. And it's like, who are the good guys? Ones that want to live together in diversity, meaning like, you know, not conforming, like not everybody has to abandon whatever to be part, but where they value things like pluralism, religious freedom, really, and rule of law. You know, like one of my favorite places in Jerusalem is this road that in the old city, that on Friday morning, the Muslims are walking down that road to go up to the what they call Haram al Sharif, which is the Temple Mount, to pray for on Friday morning prayers. On Friday evening, the Haredi Jews, the ones with the black hats, the Orthodox, they are walking down that same road to go and pray at the Western Wall for the coming in of Shabbat. And for about 100 feet, the Via Dolorosa is on that same road. And you'll see pilgrims streaming on Friday to walk down that road to go up to the from the start of the Via Dolorosa all the way up to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And I stop people at that intersection every time I go and say, what do you see? What do you see? You don't, like, if you read the news, like, we should be wading through bodies and blood, but we're not. Why aren't we? Because we're in a place that values religious freedom, rule of law, and allows people to live and worship in the way that they see fit. And I want to celebrate that stuff all over the region, all over the world. And so, you know, I call myself an ecumenist. And I don't mean that like in a relativist way. Like I actually do hold beliefs that I'm pretty, you know, I think I think I'm right. But does it mean that I can't hang out with people who I think are wrong? No. Like, you know, I figure that, you know, I deserve you gotta have some humility when it comes to belief. Right?
I think that's
it's a very hard target, right? And it's, I mean, I don't know if you both have probably experienced this, like the beliefs that I had when I was 20, that I was just like, this is the way.
Yes.
Right? Capital T, capital W are not the beliefs that I hold now. And I would have like, you know, gone to the mat for those beliefs when I was 20. And the fact that I have different beliefs now, like, and I'm just one person, like,
right.
Like, you know, replicate that by billions, right? And be like, oh no, but you know, we're gonna like duke it out. Okay. I mean, I love to have a great conversation about faith. Like
It reminds me of all these Mormon missionaries that come to my house all the time, and they're all around that age, 18 to 20, right in that age group there. And they're on, you know, that they're on fire, if you will, and they got it all figured out. And I just say, hey guys, let's just come over for pizza and let's just have some fun. And they really enjoy that. And it's just really even the act of breaking bread together with people that are different than you. You can model to people, not only to those missionaries, us actually modeling to the world. But every time I take a picture of the new crew, the new missionaries that come in, they literally come by. Like one of the first stops they make is to my house. Every 6 weeks they rotate them.
You must be on a list or something.
I am on a list, definitely. and then they come over and we have pizza and we have a good time talking with each other. And I think it's really important. And Jason, I just wanted to bring you in on this conversation because you actually introduced me formally to Luke yesterday when we were talking, and you said, I think he would be a great guest to have on your program. Jason, I want you to kind of talk about how did you meet Luke and how did you become aware of the organization he's involved in, and also talk about maybe some of your work as a Latter-day Saint who is also doing work with evangelicals. You're the one that brought him to my attention. So obviously you have connections in the evangelical world. So maybe just talk about some of your interactions generally with evangelicals and in particular with the Philos project.
Yeah, thank you, Steve and Luke. I initially came in connection with the Philos project, I think before it started, because I was doing research as a PhD student at Brandeis University, and just a disclaimer, I'm not speaking on behalf of the United States, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Just my own story. And I was doing research on the impact of the Six-Day War, which is really, we are living through a big war. One of the major, we're going to be talking about the October 7th War for a long time,
Oh, yeah.
and the first big war in 50 years. But I did research on the 1967 war at Brandeis University, and I was interested in the impact that that war had on American Protestantism. Even though I'm, a a Jewish Latter-day Saint, a heretic of multiple directions, if you want to look at me in that direction. But and folks kept telling me about Robert Nicholson. Robert Nicholson, you got to talk to Robert Nicholson. And I believe it was actually some Jewish people, some rabbis. I was meeting with some very famous rabbis in Israel. Rabbi Yechiel Eckstein, he's one of the most famous of all time rabbis in the Jewish Christian space. And I met with Rabbi Eckstein in Jerusalem. I met with Rabbi Shlomo Riskin. I started doing research on Rabbi Mark Tannenbaum, who had passed away by the time I was doing my research, but who has worked very closely with Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel and Billy Graham. In any case, somebody gave me Robert Nicholson's phone number. He had not set up the Philos project just yet, but he was working in these spaces, and Robert was one of the leading Christian Zionist thinkers, and a true scholar. And so Robert and I had a phone conversation. I was in Israel, and I think Robert was in the States, but I remember calling Robert on the bus and just really just meeting a brother, and and Robert, Robert knew I was a Latter-day Saint with a Jewish background, I guess, or with Jewish characteristics. But I told him what I was researching, and we talked, and I picked his brain, and he helped me frame my dissertation, which later became a book, America's Road to Jerusalem: The Impact of the Six-Day War on Protestant Politics. And later I spoke with Robert at an event that Philos and the Mark Tooley's organization, that Institute for Religion and Democracy. Yeah, and so that's how I started coming into to Luke's orbit as well. And I spoke on the book, and folks at Philos were interested in the book. Not as big as the Burning Book, but a very academic book. But I grew to appreciate, I think, as a Jewish person, I grew to sincerely appreciate Christian Zionist brothers and sisters, because they're supporting my people. And I would say I'm a religious pluralist. I don't know if Luke wants to debate the difference between an ecumenist and a pluralist, but I'm a religious pluralist. My father is a Bible-believing evangelical Christian who is married to a Jewish woman and who loves the Jewish people. So I feel an absolute kinship with folks like Robert Nicholson and Luke Moon, and I support what they're doing, and I love what they're doing. And so I wanted to give Luke a chance to share his story, and Philos Project story.
So Jason, what's the name of that book that you wrote?
So it's America's Road to Jerusalem: The Impact of the Six-Day War on Protestant Politics, subtitle. But it was right in the heart of the time when President Trump was moving the embassy to Jerusalem, and folks were wanting to understand, what's the background? Why is this such a big deal?
Yeah, right.
For the United States to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. I said, well, it starts from the 6-Day War. And I looked at a range of Protestant voices from the right wing to the left wing. I mean, Luke is looking, and I hope he'll talk about it, is looking more denominationally and theologically. I looked at those issues as well, but I was also looking at political perspectives. Supersessionism was the heart of everything that I was looking at, and so that was really looking at supersessionism and Christian Zionism is something that I gained deep expertise in, and I've been doing that in the Latter-day Saint space. But I also support Christian Zionism and all of Christianity, and I'm not a discriminator in that sense. I appreciate very much anyone who stands with the Jewish people.
So, Luke, I'd like for you now to talk about your organization, and maybe you could just real quick pull up the website so people can go check it out. And then, so we're going to do the screen share here. And tell us about the Philos project. What was the impetus for it? And talk about just the founding of it, and what is the goal and what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, let me pull up this. It's actually the screen share here. Let me get to actually not that one. Sorry.
All right.
One. Yeah, this one. It is the Philos Project. We promote positive Christian engagement in the Near East. That's our tagline. And really, we found that the conversations about Israel and the Jewish people tended to be fairly, I don't call them bombastic. Like it was, they're just, there was a lot of very tense ways of having the conversation about what was going on in the region. And so we kind of wanted to expand the conversation, right? Because Israel is not located in, let's call it like the gated community of Western Europe. It's more in the it's like in the hood, right? Like it's a much more challenging neighborhood to live in the Middle East than it is to live in Western Europe. And that's and a lot of people, when they would describe Israel, they would, and it is a proper tension, mind you. It would hold Israel to account by the standards of Western Europe, but then expect it to just kind of let its neighbors roll over it or something like that, right? When they responded, by being not weak, they would get attacked for it. It's happening right now. It's, Israel was brutally attacked on Shabbat, on the day that the Jews celebrate the joy of the Torah. Okay, that was the day that they were attacked on. And then, now Israel is preparing to respond, and the world is at arm, like in like, oh my gosh, I can't believe, they're not being nice to the people that attacked them randomly, right? And so that's the challenge. And so we were started actually in 2014. ISIS was the main player at the time. We raised awareness about Christian persecution, and we were trying to address the issues facing Christians in the region. And we saw Israel is really the model of the region as opposed to the problem of the region, right? If every country in the Middle East decided to embrace pluralism, religious liberty, rule of law, that kind of thing, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
No, that's true. That's true. Why don't you exit out real quick so we can just go full screen again? And this is important. So you guys, okay, so this was, of course, at the height of ISIS, which had taken huge swaths of land. And it looked like it could be an existential threat to the Jewish people if ISIS was allowed to remain and stand. And so, and then the dismantling of ISIS was a very important thing that happened. But a lot of the ideology of ISIS is still around well, you could say Hamas, of course, in many ways has embraced a lot of ISIS's tactics and embraced what ISIS has done. So you were birthed out of this thing where you thought, so this is the other thing. What I like about you guys is, look, I guess I just not that I put myself in that place, but I have found my place to be more of a moderate, a place of moderation. And I think that sometimes there are Christian organizations that are using their support of Israel to kind of maybe fulfill a theological agenda, or the people, like, for instance, in the 1970s, the book that sold the most copies, period, was The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey. And everything had to do with the formation of the state of Israel in 1948. A biblical generation is 40 years. And essentially, the book was saying that Jesus was going to return in 1988. And so that was a really big thing, a big push. That's the world that I was kind of raised in. I remember even seeing the survival food in my parents' garage that my parents had got, and so this was really big in the evangelical world. And of course, this ties in with Jason with his book, talking about the 6-Day War, because that was significant. That played a major role in the evangelical world. And so then even some people thought, well, actually, the biblical generation was from 1967, so there was some anticipation that maybe Jesus would come in by 2007. Which of course these dates have since passed. But I also think it's really important that, look, I read when I was in high school, I was, I would say I was definitely in favor of Israel as an evangelical. But I remember reading an article by George Will, who is a conservative, but he's an atheist. And he said, I support Israel for purely secular reasons. I don't support them or non-theological reasons, because he doesn't believe in God. And I thought, oh, that really resonated with me, that if we need to make a case for the state of Israel, it really needs to be done, in my sense, with secular language, having your faith inform your beliefs, right? And that's kind of the lens that you're viewing it from, but to be able to make it, but also be in a place of, hey, no, this is a reasonable position to take, whether you are believing God or not. And I get the feeling that that's kind of what your group is trying to do, is trying to create a space for Christians who want civility, pluralism, and not to say, okay, we, all these things are, the world's going to come to an end, and everything's wrapping up, and we got to play a role in getting these Jews all back to Israel. Just maybe talk a little bit about that. Contrast yourself to what maybe some other, not that we want to bash, but just maybe just talk about what your
organization. There are so many. It's not just it's on the Christian side. It's on the humanitarian side. There is an expectation that when you work in the region, that you are expected to pick a side. And it's not just like a mild side. It's like you love the Jew and hate the Arab, or love the Arab and hate the Jew. That's the baseline. And so we initially said, like, we're not going to do that. Like, if we started back in the day when websites had blogs, remember that? Right? And when we'd post articles on our blog, some that we wrote, some that we had written for us, some that we found. And those, for every 3 articles, 2 would be about something else in the region, and 1 would be about Israel. And the idea there was like, let's put the conversation where it belongs first. It's like, it is a local conversation. There's a lot of stuff happening in the region. Like ISIS, like I said, ISIS was like laying waste to large parts of Christian Iraq, right? Like, we were going into Jordan. The first time I went into Jordan, I met with Iraqi Christian refugees who, because the refugee camps set up by the UN were sectarian, meaning there was Sunni camps, there were Shia camps, but there were no Christian camps. And the Christians wouldn't go in the camps with either of the Muslims because, they didn't want their families destroyed. And so they were like in the random apartments scattered throughout Amman and other parts of Jordan, in Lebanon. Like, that was where they were. And, it's one of those things where it was a really hard moment where I remember sitting with some aid workers. And this was, early on in the kind of the ISIS destruction of Iraq, sitting with aid workers in Amman having coffee. And I said, so what does this look like in a year? And the answer I got by the aid workers was like, that's a good question. And what was shocking to me was the lack of plan. there was like no plan for what happened. How do we help the Christians? How do we like do something for them? And so the thing that Robert and I have always leaned into is like, it's not enough to say something, you got to do something. But that what we also found is that because we're the kind of people that like to go have conversations with people who think and talk differently than we do, we tend to have we have a broad network of relationships. And so we're able to pull together people who would never sit in the room together, but because we facilitated, we organized it, they would come. And we started having these roundtable discussions. How do we push things out and get some plan in place and create some strategy and build out some tactics to achieve this, the strategy and that kind of thing, and really kind of try and be thought leaders in this space. And so we were never saw ourselves as being like, like the address for everybody, like the Christian Zionist address, right? As much as we saw ourselves as the people who were thought leaders in the space. Like it was almost a little bit like we're like a think tank, but we're not, because we're not academic enough. We're not a media shop because we don't like just do media. We're not just advocacy either because like we think about stuff, we just don't do it so we're kind of a mess in that, and then like we don't fit in anybody's category nicely, but we're still people who like emphasize relationships, value trying to identify ways that we can find collaborative opportunities to make the world a better place in that region that is challenging.
Yeah, it is. And I guess, for people who want to support this project, we're going to have a link to that website that we showed on the screen there. So if you'd like to support the organization, the Philos project, please go and help them out. I've been providing a lot of different links to a lot of different organizations, a lot of guests from different organizations to help this cause. I really feel that your project, your group, is really an important voice to be heard here, and it really brings civility to the conversation in a very barbarous world that we live in. And
let me give you two specific examples there, because I think it will be helpful. One is that we are supporting and raising money right now for an effort to rebuild a place called Kfar Aza, which is one of the towns that was right on the border with Gaza. One of the is Jewish towns that was. There's more people died in that town than are currently alive, right? And we have taken thousands of people to that village. So our funds right now will go directly to the rebuilding of that community and supporting the people that are there and traumatized. At the same time, we right now have what is a person called the Rami Ayad Scholar, which is a scholarship we put together for Palestinian Christian Arabs who want to see the Palestinian territories be more pluralistic and basically advocate for freedom. And so we set up a scholarship, the Rami Ayad Scholarship, and we have a guy who is going through a human rights program at Catholic University of America who's a scholar for that. And so for us, it's not enough just to say that we are, supporting both sides. It's actually like we actually support both sides, actually physically, because, the expectation of you just, how many Palestinians you meet, how many people do you talk to? What kind of people did you talk to? Like, that's the kind of stuff you get out of people. And so we're much more in the business of showing rather than telling, which probably also doesn't help us all the time. But like, we just want to be the kind of people that we actually do what we say.
Well, I think that's important. And, I got some pushback last week because I had done a lot of series of this whole Israeli situation. And I got some pushback from people saying, hey, you're being very one-sided here, Steve. And I thought, and then somebody in my interfaith group reached out to me and said, "Hey, look, you need to talk to Muhammad." And he's a member of my interfaith group, so we became friends, and we talked the other day. And so I think it's important that, yeah, that's the key thing. And and then I've been hearing from some people who were criticizing me. They say, "Okay, we're glad that you're talking to other people, because I do have a real deep love for the Jewish people. It's there, just like I have a deep love for the Latter-day Saint people. And so I'm kind of one-sided in both those groups as well. But I do feel like it is important to talk to, I have a lot of evangelicals. I have ex-Mormons come on my program too, and evangelical ex-Mormons who are now evangelicals or atheists. They also have a voice on my show too. So I really feel like it's important that we get that. That's really, I really do appreciate that, Luke, because a lot of these Christian organizations don't spend any time talking to, like, for instance, Palestinian Christians.
Right.
And I really feel that that's one thing that really grieves me, because there are many Christian brothers and sisters that live in Palestine, and their voices need to be heard too. And of course, there's many Arab Christians that live in Israel, and we need to also listen to them and have them as part of the conversation as well. I do feel sometimes that politically Christians have gotten too political, especially in America. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to things like this, I think it's important that we remember that we're Christians first,
right?
And be Christ-like in how we deal with that. Jason, maybe speak to that briefly.
Yeah, one thing I love about Luke and Robert and the Philos project is that they are working in the whole region, and they're looking to build partners with Arabs who want to make peace. And part of that foundational principle is just accepting the right of the state of Israel to exist. And so that's one of the rules that guides the Philos project. That I really look to them, because they have incredible integrity on this picture, and they're looking to build a Middle East that is peaceful, that and accepts the state of Israel's right to exist, accepts the right of Christianity to exist in the Middle East. And I love that. We have I think in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we have some confusion in our church, that we can look to the Philos project to help us, because accepting the state of Israel's right to exist, and the right of Christian communities to exist, it should be a red line. We should not be working with people or organizations that do not accept Israel's right to exist. That's, for me, it's a religious red line and a moral red line. This has nothing to do with politics. And so I share that with the Philos project, and I want Latter-day Saints to learn from their perspective and their moral clarity.
Yeah, Luke, yeah, I think what the work that you guys are doing is extraordinary. It's something I can get behind, that I feel very comfortable that is, there's Christian organizations. Now I had Chris on with the Christian Agency for Israel, and they're doing a really good work there as well. He's actually going to try to set it up so that maybe our channel can host a tour to Israel next year, God willing. And that would be, I'd like to see what it'd like to finally go there, to see if it gets under my skin like it did to you, Luke. I think, again, talking about the importance of interfaith, what I find so fascinating, Luke, is that you had said, like, a year ago, you didn't really, now a little over 2 years ago, I didn't know a single Mormon. Now, of course, folks, we know the proper name is Members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So do forgive us if we occasionally use the term Mormon, just because that's more familiar for us, but we do want to acknowledge that the full name of your church is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But also that, I didn't know anybody. And then just recently, in the past year, and you didn't plan on this, but you actually started engaging with Latter-day Saints. Now, I want you to talk about your engagement with Latter-day Saints, and then I want to finish up with you also discussing maybe the different varieties of how Protestants and Christians view the Jewish state. But I want you to talk about a little bit about your interactions with Latter-day Saints, because overall they've been pretty positive, haven't they?
Yeah,
including with Jason.
I mean, Jason's probably like one of the first I met, but he's like such a, like, the Jew who became a LDS guy. Like, what the heck, right? Like, it's a very like weird thing. And so, but like, we also, didn't spend hours together. We had some phone calls kind of thing. Whereas, like, actually, I started doing a project with the Chosen, which there's a lot of LDS guys who have been involved in bringing that to film, to the small screen or Netflix Prime. And so I was working on a project, and there was a whole film crew involved, and all the guys in the film crew were all LDS. And I'm like, and I didn't actually know it. I'll tell you, the moment where I realized it was when I actually ordered a bottle of wine for the table at the restaurant in Jerusalem. And I was like, how many glasses do we need? And everybody else at the table was like, no, like, I was like, oh, wait, I actually didn't even know. I didn't know they were like, they just seemed like normal, like everyday Christian people, right? And I'm like, well, this is so not what I expected, right? Because like the only Mormons LDS people that I had encountered, and I didn't even encounter these folks much, was like the missionaries are going to door to door stuff, right? Like I would see them. I lived in Hawaii for a while, and there was a lot there, and I would see them, or but never really interacted. I'm gonna get on the list too, mind you, for this, but I didn't have any come to my door, right? Like it's just I didn't know any, right? But I grew up, with all the cartoons and stuff about, here's what the Mormons believe, whatever. And I've been trying to figure out, because I'm very interested in Christian denominations of all kinds, right? I'm fascinated how we read this book together. We read the same book and come away with different, like not just different interpretations, but really almost like I describe it as more like, it's like facets of a diamond, right? Like everybody's looking at the same book, but they're going to emphasize one thing over another, right? Like, it's in the Protestant world, it's what I would call like this spectrum of orthopraxy to orthodoxy, right? Right practice to right belief. On one side, like the let's say the Reformed camp, the Presbyterians, half Southern Baptists, like that crowd, like right belief is central. It's like the most important thing. Whereas for other denominations, particularly on the I would say on the Pentecostal holiness side of things, but even most of the Church of Nazarene and the Methodists, they all believe in that you can obtain a level of perfection here on earth. Presbyterians, like that's incomprehensible. Like there's no way, right? And so both are reading the same text, guys. Right? And somehow they come to those different, and they'll say the other side's super wrong, and I'm like, whatever. I mean, I have my own take. I think I actually tend to be more on the Reform side, but I'm not gonna beat up the Methodists or Pentecostal holiness people much. But it's like my point is there's this spectrum, and then when I started looking into it in relation to Jews in Israel, I realized that there is it is a theological conundrum that is not clear, and which is one of the challenges. I think one of the things that 80% of Christians will come down pretty much the same on things like pro-life, the role of the family, marriage, like those types of issues. We're pretty across the board. I think good 80% are pretty consistent. The Israel thing is it crosses currents. It doesn't fit the charismatic progressive line necessarily. It doesn't denominationally, it's all over the place. And so as a result, I really began to explore that. And theologically, where I basically the question that every denomination is wrestling with is, does the Jewish people and the land of Israel, because it's always the people in the land, it's always those, like it's not either the land or but it's the people and the land. Does it matter to God in a unique and special way still, right? Or is it like, is the Jews being in the land special, or is it just like Fijians living in Fiji and French people living in France? Now, different denominations, some say yes, and some say no.
So this would be a good time to bring up that chart. So
Yeah.
let's show that. And so you did a breakdown of basically almost all of Christendom, if you will. And of course, you're still working on where you're going to put the Latter-day Saints in this picture.
I do, and it's really fascinating to me, because it's just very fascinating to me. But yeah, this is basically my way of kind of, I call it chunking, right? It's a way of kind of blocking major blocks of Christian theology, particularly in the West.
So real quick, just so we can get
Yeah.
an understanding here, folks, and I'll just kind of do a quick breakdown if you don't mind. So we have Reformed. These are people that come out of the Calvinistic tradition, okay, which is actually what the kind of the world that I was born into, as having a Christian Reformed family on both sides. And then there's Armenian, which is birthed out of really Methodism, if you will, the Wesley brothers who gave us Methodism, and that also became like the holiness movement. The Pentecostals came out of that group. And then you have the mainline. What are mainline? Mainline is the main Protestant churches that essentially were here at the founding of America, or the establishment churches here in the United States of America. So they're referred to as the mainline. But you also have to realize that every one of these mainline denominations have a evangelical doppelganger, if you will. Like there are mainline Lutherans, and then there are evangelical Lutherans. Okay, so just so you get a better understanding of that. So mainline is kind of, it's breaking down a little bit too, and the mainline used to be the dominant mainline Protestantism used to be the dominant religion here in America for much of the history, and has now since receded into almost obscurity at this point. And then what we have is apostolic. Of course, these are people, this comes out of the idea that the Roman Catholic Church, and of course, before there was the split between the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox, you actually had one church body that a little over 1,000 years ago broke into two, being Roman Catholic and Orthodox. I find it interesting you have Anglican in there, which is a type of Protestantism, but also does have what you could consider a type of apostolic succession through the Archbishop of Canterbury. So that breaks it down a little bit. Did I do okay there, Luke?
That was amazing. It's like, yeah, you could well done. That's exactly right. And yeah, at the bottom, my breakdown is on the basis of, do they have theological support? Yes or no? And they have political, and by political support, I don't mean like Republican Democrat. I mean like, is it historic? Do they support, like, if you polled the average Reformed person, do you support Israel? The answer is going to be yes. But it's not theologically based. I mean, they would see Israel and the Jewish people in the way they would see Fiji and the Fijians. Like they're everybody's the same in God's redemptive plan for the Reformed side. And that's recent, because you got some major Reformed theologians like Jonathan Edwards who were very Zionist, actually. But that's so on the Armenian side, they're the most like, they're the ones that's the white hot core of Zionism on the Christian side. The main line, it's neither political nor theological, but it's not necessarily, like, it's more rooted in social justice orientation as opposed to like strict theological. So they wouldn't support it because they tend to focus on the social justice side and see they originally were very supportive of Israel politically, as a, like, the early mainline churches were very pro Jewish and pro-Israel, and that shifted mostly in the late 80s, in the 90s, and then the non-political support or theological support on the apostolic side, actually it's more rooted in pragmatism, meaning like they have members who are like, right now there is an Orthodox church and a Catholic church in Gaza, and there are only like 700 Christians left in Gaza anyways, but they're in those two churches. Actually, all the Christians basically went to the churches, and that's where they're staying right now. They will, and so you're not going to get a statement out of out of Pope Francis or the Greek Orthodox Patriarch in support of Israel. You're just not, because it doesn't do them any favors, right? Like, it actually hurts the people on the ground. And so it's more rooted in a pragmatism for the safety of those living in Muslim majority countries.
And it's also the idea that the Pope sees himself as a shepherd of the flock. So his primary goal is to protect the flock.
Yes.
And that includes many Catholics in countries where they're, and also keep in mind that the seat, if you will, of Orthodoxy is in Constantinople, or what was Constantinople is now in Istanbul. So of course it makes sense that the Orthodox are not going to be putting out strong statements. So it's perfectly understandable, because in their minds, first and foremost, they're shepherds that need to protect the flock. Yes. So it's not. Yeah. So I think that's the way they look at it, and I actually find that to be an honorable position to take.
No, I agree. I don't like the only group here that I have real issue with is the mainlines. They just, I think they represent us very poorly in their commentary about it. I don't think they really behave inappropriately. But yeah, I think the interesting thing is, like I said, I'm not quite sure. Again, this is my year one of Luke's engagement with the LDS folks. I have yet to quite put them into which box. I had a very interesting conversation, and I don't know if this is this is what LDS folks think or not, but my sense was LDS tends to be fairly universalist in the way that the Orthodox, the Eastern Orthodox, the Greek Orthodox in particular, are universalist, meaning that it's fairly common in Eastern Orthodox churches to believe that everybody goes to heaven, but for people who don't want to be there, it's hell. Meaning it's a miserable place to be. Like, they're they're in the presence of God, but they hate every second of it. Right? Like, there was some in C.S. Lewis's Great Divorce. There's some of this kind of thinking in there a little bit as well. He was Anglican, so, but yeah, that idea that it's not like there's this lake of fire or something like that, but it's more that it's the equivalent of a lake of fire, because you're so miserable for eternity because you don't want to be there, right? It's like being at a party when you don't want to, right? And everybody's having fun and you're miserable, except for eternity.
Yeah. That's yeah. And that reminds me, Dr. Kyle Bashir's my good friend, also a Mormon scholar, Baptist, Southern Baptist. We had a conversation about the Great Divorce, and I don't know, maybe read it a long time ago, but the next day he sent me a copy of that in the mail. So Kyle, I'm going to get to that book. I think that's it's actually, I kind of like that, that the way that they approach that as well. So you're trying to figure out, yeah, okay, so the LDS, where do they fit in this? Because we were talking off camera, hey, you could argue that Joseph Smith was the first Zionist candidate for president in American history. That you could argue that the right around the time that right around this time in the 19th century, you're having all these different groups coming out. You have the Seventh-day Adventists. You have the Plymouth Brethren, which is super influential in giving us the idea of dispensationalism. And then the idea, this idea is seeded during this period of time, that in order for the kinds of things to be wrapped up, if you will, in the future, that Israel would be for the Jews to return back to their homeland. and reestablish the state of Israel, that's kind of plays a real foundational role in a lot of these groups that sprung out of the 19th century.
Yep. No, there's some very important like passages that kind of point like, and you can see how these things get shaped in that direction. Like, for instance, there's a very famous passage in Romans where Paul, the Apostle Paul, says, "When the fullness of Gentiles has come in, all Israel will be saved." And what, like, basically, different people interpret like, is that a statement of time or a statement of inclusion? Because like there is a way to read it where it's like, when the fullness of Gentiles has come in, then all Israel will be saved, meaning that like God will, he's out saving the Gentiles now, and at some point he will reorient himself and like, or Gentiles were done, he's going back to like focus on the Jews. Or is it a statement of inclusion, meaning like when the fullness of the Gentiles has come in, all Israel will be saved, meaning all those who believe that Jesus is the Messiah, they constitute Israel, like a new Israel in a sense. Now, different, again, it's one of those passages, it's just one, where because there's not a modifier, it's hard to know what it is that was intended. And people come down in different ways, but you can see that like people are reading this dispensational theology was very prominent. Obviously in England where it started, they orient their service is very much like a Sabbath or a Shabbat Jewish service. The Eucharist is actually in the center of the body, in the midst of the people. If anybody's been to a synagogue, the Torah portion is read it says in the midst of the people, which means, so that's why the altar for a lot of the Plymouth Brethren, like it's not at the front, it's in the center. In the synagogue, it's in the center, and the people are around it, facing it, right? So it's and there's some different places you go, they've put the tabernacles at the front, much like the Orthodox do, but it is moved to the middle in the Plymouth Brethren in a lot of synagogues. I mean, that's one example of how like these denominations are trying to understand how to wrestle with it. But let me just say one more thing on this, is the point in which I have become over the last couple of years, particularly, very aware of how our lack of understanding of Jewish history, but even like thinking about this stuff is incorporated into most of our worship. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that Paul says that gets interpreted as in like basically that God was done with the Jews. And the problem with that is that 25 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, Paul offered sacrifices in the temple. It's in Acts 21. So if the whole idea that Paul had was that like none of that matters, then why would he then do it? Because I don't think we can read Paul and say he's not consistent at all. I think quite the opposite. I think we have to read Paul and see him as like one of the most consistent people. Like we have to take him seriously, but we also have to measure his letters, what he's saying in his letters has to be seen through the lens of what was his practice. Oh, that's just a taste, guys. It's just a taste. There's so much there. You want me to unshare my screen, by the way?
Yeah. Well, before you do that, I want to go through here and just say a couple things about this that you might want to make a couple updates. So in the mainline category, you have the United Methodist Church. there is this new group. It's no longer united at this point. There's a break off. And so the Global Methodist Church, I would probably put in the Armenian category. That would be political and theological support. I would have to go to my friends, Dr. Jordan Cooper and Willie Grills, Reverend Willie Grills, both who are in communion or actually affiliated with the Missouri Synod Lutheran Church, if they would agree to taking on the Reformed label. I don't know if they would necessarily go with that. So I'd like to hear from them what they have to think. So either way, that's just a couple little things I caught there. And maybe, yeah, you can close out the screen share now.
No, it's listen, I love that stuff. I give a presentation like this several times a year to some of our incoming Philos students. And I just say, you name the denomination, I pretty much tell you where they stand on Israel and the Jewish people, and it's just always fascinating to
That's fascinating. That's a real. I love that.
Yeah. So I would just interject. I think the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is really an extension of the dispensationalism.
Okay.
That Luke and I think Luke just prove the case. I mean, dispensationalism came out of Great Britain. The British Isles is where it hatched. And we've talked about how Joseph Smith was ethnically British, and he was, during the time of the Restoration, he was investigating Methodism, the Baptist movement, Presbyterianism. But he even says in the Joseph Smith history, I was leaning toward Methodism. So I think that there's a case to be made of the influence of Arminianism and Wesleyan Methodism on Joseph Smith. It's where he was partial.
Was it what my understanding is like that Joseph Smith was also like from upstate New York? Is that?
Yeah, he's from upstate New York. Yeah,
and so it was actually the ground zero for the Plymouth Brethren. Where it hit was actually also in upstate New York.
That's referred to as the burned over district.
It was. Yeah. No.
Yeah. So I think
you guys are the only people I've ever had a conversation with that know that line, burned over. I literally tell people that all the time. This is a great group.
Yeah.
Jeez, I'm having too much
fun. So I just add that the dispensationalism, I think Joseph Smith was, he was pulling into this dispensational view of providential history, we could say. Okay. I mean, history is real, and then I believe providence is also real, but kind of the interaction of God and history is the dispensational theory. And I mean that Darby and the John Darby and the John Nelson Darby, Plymouth Brethren, Cyrus Schofield, they were all trying to understand what Luke is talking about, is that the times of the Gentiles would come to an end, and God would resume his covenant with the Jewish people.
No way. It's a very interesting book. Wow.
It's a great book. I actually read this in college. I was in a Jacksonian era democracy class, and this was one of the required readings. And I forget, you know what? I remember communicating with somebody, and they said, "Hey, Steve, I'll send you a copy of the book." I don't remember who you were, but thank you for sending me this copy of The Burned Over District by Whitney R. Cross. This is a really fascinating book. It needs to be part of all people's collections that are looking for books to read about the world that Joseph Smith grew up in and the influences that were on him. Also, interestingly enough, Luke, I have my friend Jonathan Neville, who's a believing Latter-day Saint, who wrote the book Infinite Goodness, Jonathan Edwards and the Translation of the Book of Mormon, to show that Jonathan Edwards's sermons, phraseology, and stuff permeates the text of the Book of Mormon, and that he's probably one of the single most important, outside of the Bible, most important influences on the translation process of the Book of Mormon. The evangelical Protestant Zionist Jonathan Edwards,
Reformed, mind you, Reformed. Like he is like the preeminent one, like preeminent Reformed theologians of America.
Yep,
and he was a full-on Zionist.
Yeah. Exactly. So this is the milieu, the world that Joseph Smith grew up in, and I think that's why it's important that we have this conversation, because the Restoration was birthed out of evangelicalism. It was birthed out of the Second Great Awakening. It was birthed out of Jonathan Edwards in that world. And so so we have much more in common with each other than people actually realize. And that's been the beautiful thing about this project, is being able to make these connections with our communities and show that in many Latter-day Saints that I know would have a very similar view on a pew level, like at the ward level, pew level. Jason, would you agree that most typical Latter-day Saints would probably have a similar view of Israel right now that many American evangelicals have, that they love Israel, they support the Jewish people, and they would almost be kind of considered Zionists? So how would you describe like the average American ward? Would that
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I think that we are brothers and sisters in Christian Zionism. I mean, and the last episode we talked about Orson Hyde, right?
Mm-hmm.
That I did with you, and I mean, Orson Hyde was he was meeting Jewish rabbis in Europe, Ashkenazi Jewish rabbis in the Netherlands, in England, which are interesting, right? When we talk about the Dutch and the British, where Jews were safe, and he was praying and dedicating the land of Israel for the return of the Jewish people, and for the Jewish people to have a distinct nation and government.
And he was sent there on orders from Joseph Smith. He's one of the 12
on
apostles.
orders.
Yep.
Yeah, unmistakable. Orson Hyde and Joseph Smith were acting out this dispensationalism that was already there in New England, upstate New York, developed in the British Isles. They're acting on this great project that many other Christians, not just Latter-day Saints, many other Christians were wanting this project to succeed.
Well, Luke, I want to say thank you. You're an awesome human being. I think we had an incredibly enjoyable conversation, in the sense that we are brothers who have found commonality and one, our love for the Jewish people.
Yep.
And we know that, and also our love for all the people of the Middle East. Okay. All those who are in favor of peace in the Middle East. We love all those people. And those are the people we want to have at the table. Those are the people we want to break bread with. Those are the people that we want to have a commonality with. And so, Luke, I just want you to just wrap this up. If you have any final words you'd like to share with my audience.
Yeah, I would say that, what I've found is that there are a lot of people that, who are of strong belief, that actually are very pluralistic. I mean, I will sit with a mountaintop settler in Israel and hear like how they view the Arabs that are their neighbors, and they're not like, all having dinner together, but it's not like some deep hate. And I think where the line, where I'd like people to draw lines, is I think it's wholly appropriate to say that the line should be between violent and non-violent Muslims, like on the Muslim side, because that's where the line is. Because if, like, I don't know, like, I don't like to be called a moderate, actually. Because I don't feel myself a moderate. I feel like I'm a raging follower of Jesus. Right? Like I'm very committed to doing what Jesus says. That makes me like very committed. I go to church on Sunday. I read my Bible, I pray, I do the stuff, right? And often, though, we say of Muslims, like the good kind of Muslim is the moderate Muslim. And I'm like, well, if somebody said that to me, I would be like, no, like, I think you can be a zealous Muslim.
That's fair enough. Fair enough.
Committed
to
doing the teachings of Muhammad, and not seeing the destruction of Jews or Christians or Druze or Alawites or Circassians, or like anybody else in the land or anywhere else in the world. And hopefully that's the majority. And that's where I want to like lift up those people who are like committed to their faith, strong believers in whatever they believe, and yet value that pluralism, value that, like, let people do as they see fit. And and maybe in the process, we'll have some really great conversations.
Thank you. Well, I think this was a great conversation. And Jason,
let me just interject, Luke. This is for another episode, but this is the beauty of the Abraham Accords.
Yes,
is that we are beginning to see Muslim Zionists, especially in the United Arab Emirates. I would make a case that there is the growth of Muslim Zionism in the United Arab Emirates because of the Abraham Accords.
Oh, interesting point. Yeah, that would be a great topic for another conversation. This was a great conversation. Jason, I want to say that at the very beginning, you said, I do not speak on behalf of the United States government or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but I do think you speak on behalf of a lot of Latter-day Saints and in how you view Israel. So I think that's important, that a lot of Latter-day Saints would be in line with how you represented yourself today. And so I want to hear comments from you. What did you think of this conversation? And what do you think about the situation in the Middle East? I'm trying to bring balance to the conversation because this is the time for balance and not extremism. And I think it's really important that we be centered and tempered in how we handle this, and then don't get caught up and watch. Turn off the news. Okay, take a walk outside too. Okay, well, focus on your mental health as well. Okay, during these times, it's important to do this as well. Take care of yourself. Okay, don't let these things do harm to you as well. Mental. This is a really important thing, that you keep an eye out for your mental health as well, and put things in their proper perspective, knowing that we are on this planet that's, that we live in a universe that's so large and vast, it's incomprehensible, and we don't really know in many ways where our place is in this whole thing, right? Some of us believe that right now we're on the precipice of the second coming of Jesus, and others that tell us that now his return is a long ways off, because there's a lot of things that we need to get right here before he's returning. So some would argue that too. And I think maybe part of it's a combination of the two, that we are participants with the divine, and that we have a role to play. And we're not just these automatons that have been set here that have been wound up to put on this play. I do think that that's why I value much of the ideas of free agency, the idea of free agency within Latter-day Saint theology. There's a lot of things I admire about Joseph Smith, and he brought some original ideas and also took ideas from other people and kind of integrated into Mormonism. And so I find that to be fascinating. And again, this is important, that if we can have conversations with evangelicals and Latter-day Saints, I think many things can be possible. And I want to thank all of you for all your financial support, those who are financially supporting the channel. I also want to remind people, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell for when a new episode comes out. Make sure you have that notification setting set on YouTube. And remember, this is the most important thing, folks. Remember, all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.